Chapter 15. Pat strode out into the open plaza to meet the approaching cavade, his hard scrutiny reserved for his friend's captors. Four in number, they looked him over warily, feeling his authority unknown to them as he was. He did not allow them to remain long in doubt of his intentions. "What's the general idea?" he rapped out, waving towards Ezra and Sam. The leader of the band pushed his bronc forward officially. "If it matters to you, friend, we're hauling these old codgers to Redford." Pat heard him out. "By whose orders?" he barked. "Well, it happens to be Denton who—" "Oh, lay off, Cliff," one of the others interrupted with harsh brevity. "We're here now. Go on in there to Redford and be done with it. I don't know who this fresh hairpin is." Pat threw out a warning hand. "Hold it, boys." His dead, level tone carried a surprising impact. "I want you to take your ropes off those two and turn them loose, and do it quick." The last word cracked like a pistol shot, and for an instant there was dead silence. Then several things happened at once. One of the roughs reached for his gun, and Pat's Colt crashed in a twinkling, and the horses started to rear and paw in the air. Matters had reached this pass, with Stevens dancing lightly about, six-gun poised, alert for the first hostile gun muzzle to show, when a heavy voice broke out, belligerent and final. "Cut that business out!" It was Redford. His bold tones carried across the distance over 100 feet, and he came stalking forward, cold, hazel eyes flashing. "What's this dang foolishness?" he rasped, scanning them all bleakly. Still watching alertly, Pat refused to answer, thus forcing an exclamation from the others. The roughs froze in their saddles, sullen and uneasy, and the man called Cliff spoke up in a tone of indignation. "Who's this hard hombre, Redford?" He indicated Pat. "We brung up a couple specimens that Denton wanted you to work over, but this Jasper says turn 'em loose. Who's boss around these digs anyhow?" he demanded with an injured air. Redford's glance coasted to Pat. "Know this pair, do ya?" he queried gruffly. "I know 'em." Pat's smile was thin. "They're friends of mine, for that matter. Good friends." He still appeared to be waiting grimly to see which way the cat would jump. Redford's grunt was faintly nonplussed. "What would Denton have against him, Stevens?" Pat declined to attempt any excuse. "I don't know," was his unyielded return, in a tone which said that he cared even less. "Well, Chess claims he got nosy about Vern," Cliff threw in with indignation. "Go on," growled Redford. "Well, Denton seemed to think that was plenty." The balky renegade reddened. "What kind of fool's play is this?" he roared. "Denton's worried, so he sends me two old men tied up in ropes. Something's fishy here, and I don't like her." He glared at Cliff, who shrugged. "Not my doing, Redford," he muttered. And while they were still wrangling, Pat moved forward to whip out a knife and coolly slash the bounds of Sam and Ezra's wrists. He winked at them out of a wooden face as they tumbled out of the hall to chafe their aching hands. Seeing this, Cliff waxed hotter, protesting was boiling out of him. "Wait till Denton gets up here, could you?" he hurled at Redford. "He'll tell you the story. He didn't give it to us." Redford waved him away. "Forget it," he commanded. He had a tight smile for Pat. "Make up your mind yet, Stevens?" he asked, rather as if expecting an immediate return for favors rendered. Pat's head shake was a minute. "I move slow at times, Redford, but I get there," he gave back. "I'll let you know." The outlaw chieftain shrugged his thick shoulders and turned away. "Don't make me wait too long," he tossed back. Cliff and his confederates followed grumblingly, leaving Pat and his partners alone. "Well," Ezra was markedly gruff. You would turn up, Stevens, in time to catch us in that jam. There was no trace of gratitude in his crusty tone. Pat eyed him skeptically. Maybe you'd rather I hadn't?
No, but don't be getting any ideas, admonished Malone, annoyed. We got out of it all right ourselves if you hadn't crowded us. What in time you doing up here now anyway, Stevens?
I should ask you that, was the cool retort. They told him, briefly outlining their adventures since parting with him in Sundance. Well, that settles it. Pat nodded at end. Denton's an Avalanche now and knows where Dell is. I'll have to get back there fast. Expected to make the down trip with young Spain anyway. They saw the good sense of that.
We'll all go.
No, I want you two here. Pat explained his strong suspicion if Vern Hunter was indeed still in this country and hiding, he was in all likelihood somewhere in Big Medicine. You might even see him and not know it, he admitted. Must be some reason why they're covering for him so strong. Denton might try and give you a hard time, too. If he does, you'll have to bluff it through. With not much time left for talking, he acquainted them sketchily with the setup here and then made for the barn. The stage stood hitched when he arrived, and glimpsing him, Roy Spain sighed with relief. You seem to get along with any kind of crowd, Stevens, he greeted with ungrudgingly admiration. But for once I'm glad you haven't let me down. Don't you worry. I'll serve notice when I quit. Pat grinned. If it's only 10 minutes, though. Come on, let's shove off, Spain. They climbed aboard, and the stage pulled up before the general store, and several men climbed in for the trip down the mountain. A few minutes later, they were off. Had you worried back there once or twice, huh? Pat smiled as the younger man, as they bowled, rattling down the long grades. Roy was frank to confess as much. You pack a fine mixture of gall and clear sand, Stevens, or else you're carrying a rabbit's foot. There's just one thing, though, that puzzles me. What's that? You made no bones about giving your right name when Brute Redford asked. Pat laughed, regarding him quizzingly. I'm not exactly a fool, Spain. I didn't take him for one either. Only question in my mind is whether Hunter isn't in Redford's back room right now. Roy flushed. He ain't. There's times when I don't even know where Vern is. He stopped. Yeah? And other times when you're glad you don't know, is that it? Pat caught up to him coolly. He waited a moment. Wonder how Dell would look at that, Spain. Roy's flush deepened. I can't help how she looks at it, he burst out. That so? Levelly, Pat recounted the girl's experience in Avalanche as the partners had told it, watching Spain's young face harden to flint as he listened. By your own words, Denton was acting as Hunter's agent. That don't bother you any, boy? Well, damn them! Spain burst out angrily. I don't know what to think, Stevens. It's hell sometimes, but... Pat was watching him, unsmiling. Why don't you break down and admit that you're trying to pry the truth out of Vern Hunter for weeks, Roy? That you came here for that purpose, and that's why you're sticking. Spain's groan was not feigned. Well, I've been working for and with crooks, Stevens, he got out. We both know it. There's a limit to what I could expect you to believe. And if I say I do? Roy's face was a picture of contending stresses. I don't even want Dell to guess what I was about, unless I succeeded. It sounds foolish when you say it, me against this cutthroat gang. Redford would kill me if he knew. Pat shook his head. It was mighty brave all the same. Reckon my opinion of you has gone up a heap, boy. No luck, though, yet, I take it. Spain threw out a hand.
Hunter's a stone wall, Stevens. He's wary as a wolf. Can't crowd a word out of him against the pitchstone. I thought if I worked him for a while and gained his confidence, he'd open up, but doesn't seem like it.
Don't tip Dell off that he's probably one of the gang, Pat cautioned. She'll catch on fast, but this kind of game it's kind of rough on girls, Roy.
I'll say, and for men too,
breathed Spain. They were still discussing the matter, with Pat satisfied that he had at last gained the young fellow's full trust when the stage rattled into Avalanche. The down trip had been considerably faster than the ascent, and it was no more than early afternoon. On Pat's advice, Spain turned the vehicle over to the barn men and then accompanied the others straight to Miss Bard's bakery.
"Well, Mr. Stevens,"
the latter greeted him primly in the little shop,
"it'll sure relieve Della Follonsbees' mind to see you. I declare if I'm not glad that you're back myself."
Pat smilingly headed off the long story which she was itching to tell. "I know, ma'am. Sam and Ezra already told me about it. I suppose we can go straight in and talk to the young lady?" The woman nodded, after looking Spain over with dubious severity. Passing on into the back, the two men found Della in the little parlor, and her face lit up at the sight of them.
"Oh, I've been praying for your return, Pat,"
she opened up, with an apologetic smile for Spain.
"There's a man in town who knows where Vern Hunter can be located."
"You mean Denton?" Pat closed off her gushing flow words. Her head shake was slighting.
"Well, maybe Chess knows at that. I'm inclined to think he does, but he'll never tell me." "Why, he offered to take me to Vern himself," she exclaimed.
"Why didn't you go?" demanded Pat shrewdly. For the first time she appeared suddenly to understand his point.
"I see."
Her frown was bemused.
"I simply didn't trust the man, Pat. It's silly of me to think you might."
"Well, that's the size of it," he told her frankly. "I don't."
"But what if we should be wrong?"
She caught him up. His frown killed any hope that she might have held. "I've proof that Denton, at least, is hooked up with a cut/gang at Big Medicine, Dell," he informed her. "Whether he's planning a ransom snatch or such a thing, I don't know. But that man, he means you no good. You can take that for gospel."
"But surely there's no occasion for any further contact with this gang you've discovered,"
she urged. Her glance went swiftly to Spain.
"You'll not go again to Big Medicine, will you, Roy?"
Spain's difference in her presence had been marked from the first. Now he looked at her almost with resentment. "I'll have to go where my work takes me."
"You mean that it's absolutely necessary for you to go back up there?"
Her uneasiness at the thought could not be disguised even from herself. Both struggled with feelings that they were reluctant to confess, and Pat's crooked smile eased the moment. "Cheer up, Dell. We made it up and back all right, with little to fret about."
"But what if I should ask you to not go again, Roy?"
insisted the girl softly. Spain fidgeted restlessly as if his feet bothered him. His young, strong face was dusky. "You can ask me almost anything, Dell," he broke out hoarsely, but his tact was unequal to the occasion, and he could not leave it at that. "You'll be going away again shortly, and then what'll it matter?" It was her turn to redden, but her sorry smile forgave him.
"You've forgotten I'm no longer rich, haven't you?"
Spain abruptly turned his back and moved to the window, and he returned more slowly. "I'll have to go, Dell. Pat and I both. I'm sorry, but we'll be real careful." They talked it over a few minutes longer, and Pat presently found it expedient to excuse himself, leaving the pair together as the best means of improving what understanding that may lay between them. He moved through the bake shop with a laughing word or two for Miss Bard, and then let himself into the street. Seems like she's kind of gone on young Spain and not above showing it, he mused with a small chuckle as he walked away. Roy knows, and he refuses to credit it, or else he's fighting his own head. Some young galoots are just that darn stubborn. The subject stayed with him during supper, and he was still pondering the mysterious ways of the young with wire amusement when he stepped into the Lucky Nugget later. If he had forgotten for the moment his previous experience in that place while passing himself off as Vern Hunter, it came back with a rush when, fronted up to the bar, he noticed a man poking another in the ribs and pointing in his direction. Pat scanned the pair with cold disdain and inwardly ignored them, waiting for his drink. A moment later, a loud, unguarded voice began declaiming alongside him. "Yeah, and I'll tell you another of his tricks," the talkative fella droned on for the benefit of some raptor listener. "You heard how Grey Meeker sold his hardware store overnight? Well, he bought it. Walked in and told Meeker he was buying it and how much he'd give. Meeker didn't have himself a chance. He told Sheriff Kinney, but by that time the papers was already signed at the point of a gun, you might say. Grey, he wouldn't let it go at that, and they met right out there in Main Street the next night, and Meeker tried to argue. And what'd he get for it? A slug in the guts." A hush fell over the place as this grim story rolled out, and it was broken by a single question. "You mean Hunter shot Meekers in cold blood?" Pat's nerves snapped tight as bowstrings as it came to him with a jolt what was afoot here. At that moment the bartender came to a halt before him with a level stare. You again, huh?" The fleshy lips parted to voice the dry words. Pat measured him briefly and turned his back to the bar. It was only just in time. Ches Denton stood 10 feet away, and a hard smirk on his face, and at his side was a man wearing a deputy badge, their eyes fastened upon Pat with hard intent. "Well, there you are, officer," Denton said smugly. "The man who claims to be Vern Hunter, with plenty of witnesses right here to swear to it if necessary." The deputy examined Pat with cynical attention. "Not much use asking if you're Hunter," he growled. Pat's head shake was almost imperceivable. "No," the single word rustled. "Are you?" the query ripped out with sudden headlong violence. Pat's teeth gleamed briefly. "Ask Denton if that's the name he wanted signed to the check he offered me a while back," he drawled. Chest showed heat. "Oh, don't let 'em tangle you up in words, Carson," he warned the deputy. "Ain't a word of truth in it. This hombre was in here a couple nights ago claiming to be Vern Hunter, and that ought to settle her." "Okay, Hunter." The deputy displayed a mounting resolve. "Unbuckle your belt and let her slide." Pat's hand stole towards his belt and paused. "There's been some talk here, but talk is cheap," he said dryly. "What's the charge?" "I'm arresting you for the murder of Grey Meeker." Pat's hand stiffened, only to relax as he felt the pressure of a hard object against the small of his back. "The intentions of your friends are certainly much to be admired," he told the deputy with faint satire. "Come get my gun yourself and tell the brave bartender he can take the greener out of my back." The lawman's gun was already out, and it was Denton who disarmed Pat with obvious pleasure in the act. "Where you take him, Carson?" he inquired suavely. "Why take him anywhere?" an aroused townsman exclaimed harshly. "Avalanche never had no jail and never needed one. Let's just finish it right there at the lamp post." "Hold it, men." Denton appeared to be the one in authority here. "Don't be going off half-cock like this. We'll give 'em a drumhead court. With this difference, I want every one of Grey Meeker's friends present at the hearing. They found this fair enough and muttered assent. Pat was led out at the head of a rapidly swelling crowd, hands bound behind him. His lips were a thin straight line now, his chilled steel gaze remote. Down street he was marched, hustled along rapidly. At a street corner a shout was raised.
"Lock him in Meeker's store. Sure, that's tight enough."
The clamour swelled to a roar of vindictive approval. Pat spotted the sign. Grey Meeker, hardware, mining supplies, over a long, rough board structure with barred windows standing on the corner. He was thrust that way. The crowd surged afterwards. There was a squabble over the keys, which were finally produced from the next door, and the door was swung back, and Pat was thrust into the dim, musty interior so roughly that he nearly fell. The door crashed, too, and the key grated in the lock, and then he was alone. End of chapter 15.